Hi everyone, my name's Scott Favelle and I'm going to talk to you tonight about cybersecurity and media workflows. But first I just want to say thanks so much for having me. It's awesome to be part of this 24/7 mega meetup and particularly good to be doing it at MonteVIDEO, which has the coolest name of all the meetups anywhere. So we'll go through three things tonight. The first is going to be the attack surface, how that's changed over time. We'll then talk about content protection, what you need to do in order to have a end-to-end video workflow dealing with premium content. And then we're going to talk about some cybersecurity basics, things that you can practically do to help protect your network. So let's dive into it. So just to highlight how the importance and the gravity of this stuff, this stat from a couple of years ago showed that out of US media firms, more than half of them had experienced 3 or more cyber attacks in just a 12-month period. And that's only going to have increased since COVID. So this stuff is absolutely critical. And in Australia, for example, we had a broadcaster that had a ransomware attack, got all through their systems, both corporate and media. And while they didn't go off air, they certainly had to make a lot of changes to keep themselves on air. And I'm sure would have had a hell of a bill once they were picking up the pieces. So yeah, so this stuff is actually really important. A little bit about me, none of you know who I am, so just quickly, I've been in media for about 25 years. I started in VHS duplication, doing everything from unloading shipping containers to being a tape op to doing editing, those sorts of things. I then moved into pay TV in a broadcast operations capacity, doing presentation and master control, and that's one of the master control rooms I worked in there. Then I spent about 15 years at Foxtel, which is Australia's largest pay TV provider. Doing both sort of broadcast and OTT, engineering, architecture, and leadership roles. And it was really at Foxtel where I got far more involved in content protection, initially on DVB conditional access, and then on OTT streaming services. For the last couple of years, I was at SBS, another Australian broadcaster, splitting my time between OTT video delivery, getting to work on things like the World Cup, which was awesome, as well as enterprise architecture, looking at more of a holistic view of the organisation from a strategy and governance perspective. And that's where I sort of got involved in cybersecurity. So for a period of about a year, I had responsibility for that while we developed the strategy and set that program up. I've recently left there and I'll be starting at 7 West Media as Technology Director in a couple of weeks' time. So yeah, so really looking forward to that. Now, the attack surface. And the attack surface is quite simply anywhere where an attacker can gain access to either your networks or your systems. And back in the early days, at least in my early days, I should say, is the world was pretty simple. We had a perimeter, it had a firewall, and we had a corporate IT, enterprise stuff, and we had broadcast. Never the two shall meet. Media came in on tapes, it got distributed as analog or SDI, and life was pretty simple. And when external services came in on that IT side, it didn't really affect us a lot. But what did affect us was when we shifted from tape-based workflows to file-based workflows. And you can see immediately that hard line between the enterprise IT and broadcast has really started to dissipate. And that's only increased over time. As we've added our OTT products, initially we were building these things on-prem and having outside internet access effectively coming in. And quickly those services moved into cloud-based services, infrastructure as a service, your AWSs, your Googles, your Azure's, or SaaS products. Think this is your Brightcoves, your Comcasts, your Adetto for DRM. And so already this attack surface is far, far wider. But it doesn't end there. Last couple of years we've been having live IP contribution, and this is a huge change because it means instead of having those critical live signals being delivered via broadcast mechanisms that were somewhat isolated from the typical cyber type attacks, they're using exactly the same protocols, using a lot of the same systems, and so absolutely vulnerable. And we've also got a lot of cloud editing happening at the moment. Initially this was just to social media, but we're seeing it now come back into the sort of core broadcast media workflows and OTT product workflows as well. And lastly, we've had COVID, we're all working from home, and as we'll see shortly, even production live videos happening at home as well. So that gives us an attack surface that looks like this, which is hugely different from what we saw in the early days. So with that in mind, I'm going to talk a little bit about content protection, And the way I like to do that is with this thing called the nightclub analogy. What the nightclub analogy is we have say we have a private nightclub. Only people in our local suburb are allowed to come in. And there's a security guard at the door and a set of line of guests coming in. First thing the security guard's going to do, you check their driver's license, see their address, and are they in the suburb or not? If they are, you let them go a bit further. So you're going to check if they're on the guest list. Have they logged in? Are they authenticated? If they get that far, maybe we're going to let them in. And one of the things we could potentially do is to write a little ID onto the camera on their smartphone. So if they take any video, we can see where it's coming from. So that's kind of like our watermarking. Now the guest's going to let them in. So the security guard's going to let them in. Now if we weren't using DRM, the security guard would basically hand them the key to the content, and away off they go. And they can basically do whatever they want with that content then, because they have the key for it. The alternative is if we're using DRM, digital rights management, the security guard's going to use his key, unlock the door, and then let the guest in. And at no point does the guest have the key. The security guard / DRM system does. Now, the other things that's happening here is there are no windows, so we can't see anything on the inside. Now, that's like our HDCP on our HDMI cable connecting our set-top box to our TV, that level of encryption. Also like what the DRM system will provide to prevent screen scraping. Now, and the last thing is that security guard, if there are any gate crashes, that security guard's going to beat them off and fend them off, and that's like our web application firewall that we'll use to deflect DOS attacks. So what that looks like in practice is we've got live signals coming in. In this case, they could be coming in via a protocol like Zixi or AWS's Media Connect. If they're coming in via files, it could be via Aspira or Signiant, providing some studio-grade encryption, as well as other benefits like resilience and better performance. The content comes in. When it's in our MAM, it needs to, or other storage needs to be encrypted at rest, and any access in via role-based access controls. Now we can see there's a picture up the top. Because in this case, this was like the recent US Democratic Convention. You might have seen this picture floating around LinkedIn. So in this case, all the live vision switching was done actually from somebody's house, where they built up a little studio control room there. That attack surface widening again. We come into our just-in-time origin, which will be converting our content into HLS, Dash, CMAF, TS segments, whatever. And when it's encrypting it, hopefully it'll be encrypting it via common encryption, which means we can use the same assets across multiple delivery formats and DRM providers. Integrating with that, we do have our DRM service. It's integrating, in this case, via Cipix, which has been a bit of a godsend for doing these kind of integrations, because it is far simpler than what it was like in the old days. And our DRM service is going to be serving up Play-Ready, Fairplay, or Widevine DRM licenses, depending on what device is coming in. Up the top, we've got our CMS and our online video platform with a set of APIs. Those APIs are being protected by our web application firewall. So, we're not going to have, that kind of abuse there. Our WAF will take care of that for us. We have our CDN. It's doing our geo-blocking, making sure that people only within the licensed territory are able to get access to the content. And we have our own devices themselves. So in the browser front, this has gotten a hell of a lot easier over the last few years with the media source extensions. And then on the device front, if there are things like connected TVs, or other mobile devices, you might have a hardware root of trust where the encryption key is embedded into the device. And when you have a hardware root of trust, you'd be more likely to be able to get access to premium content, things like 4K or early releases, because there's that extra level of security there that goes over and above software. And down the bottom we have our watermarking. So our watermarking could be done at the studio, at the source. It could be done in the middle of our own premises. It could be done on our origin, where it'll alternate which fragments will get sent, and you can generate an ID out of that. Or it could be done in the end device as well. All things that can basically say, all right, if this content's been leaked, it's up on a torrent site, how close can you work out where it came from? There's no watermarking. Well, what studio it came from, that's it. It maybe had a watermark that might tell you which provider, like which TV service or OTT service it came from. All the other mechanisms down will allow you to work out which actual customer, leaked that content. So that's probably enough on the content protection side, and we'll move back into the sort of general cyber and just go over some basic things to think about and do as media professionals. So first thing is, just have a think about and identify what your assets are. So on the content side, how much premium content are you dealing with as far as like Hollywood or sporting content? What are your own productions? Often we might look at, not give as much thought to our own productions, but if we lose access to that content, we can't just ring up the distributor and get another one. So don't forget about your own content. Think about what products you're delivering the content on. OTT products could be a news style website, but it also could be social media platforms as well. And social does have quite a high risk on the reputation and brand side. Data, first party customer data, your credit cards, but not just credit cards. Name, address, date of birth, if you've got it, gender. All these things are hugely sensitive and can potentially be worth attackers getting access to, and certainly will do a hell of a lot of damage to your brand and reputation. And there's a lot of other data that's sensitive as well, but we won't go into those. I've mentioned a few times the brand reputation. I'll just call it out again because there's the immediate financial loss you might be involved, but that brand will affect how content providers want to deal with you. If you've not been a good steward of the content, you're going to have a harder time getting access to it. And also from a customer perspective, if you've had a number of breaches or any breaches of customer data, even if it's not credit card data, there's less trust. They're less likely to want to use your service. Threat actors. Who are the bad guys? Often think of bad guys are organized criminals. Potentially after first run premium content. Or more likely, personally identifiable information, which we talked about earlier. The casual pirates, definitely a risk, and that's I think where our DRM is particularly targeted. Now, on the service availability front, we have our hacktivists. And if you're running a news organization or if your company takes stands on social issues, so an organization I was working for took a particular stand when we had a gay marriage vote or plebiscite in Australia. And during that time, we absolutely had higher levels of denial of service attacks. Hacktivists are definitely a thing. We also have your insiders, so a disgruntled employee can do a lot of damage, but as can insiders who gain access to high-res content. Absolutely a source of a source of theft and content leakage you need to worry about. And the last one is nation states. Now this isn't as crazy as it sounds because in the media we are disproportionately larger targets than our size would otherwise suggest. And if you're distributing nationally significant content, you absolutely could be targeted, or you could potentially just be a collateral damage in a broader attack across your nation's infrastructure. So moving along further into the threat types, any kind of stream capturing, we've talked a fair bit about content protection, won't go into it more. Malware and ransomware. As I said before, there was an Australian broadcaster subject to ransomware, and ransomware is a threat type is increasing more and more, as you can see from the graph there. We've got our denial of service attacks, talked about the hacktivists. Don't not think about the more standard cyber attacks that you could face. So things like phishing. If somebody gets phished, they might have their email compromised, and then you'd be surprised just how much sensitive information can go out if somebody's email is just forwarding all their content. And also on the credential stuffing side of things, which is basically using brute force style username and passwords to get access to an account. If you're running a subscription service, this is absolutely a thing that you need to think about and deal with. Other things on here that really need to be thought about, and the big one for me is vulnerabilities. So, basically patching, and I'll say this a few times coming up, is the number one thing you can really do is patch your systems. And the last one on here is privileged access abuse. So this is people abusing their credentials or using their credentials after, for example, they've left the organization. So in terms of things to do about these things, the first thing, focus on your people. I think usually this is people is the best place to start. There is tons of really great online online training out there for sort of generic cybersecurity, and it's not very expensive at all, so definitely worth investing in. In terms of things that don't cost money, is add security into job specs when you're hiring, particularly if they're developers or architects or sysadmins. Security should absolutely be part of that. And for people that are already in the organization, you put security into people's goals so that as time goes on, you can really lift that cyber capability. And don't forget basics, the things like phishing awareness and general cyber awareness. Don't forget that stuff. Patching, I mentioned before. Patching is the cheapest, easiest, most effective thing you can do. And most attacks are for old vulnerabilities that have been out there in the wild. They're not for the scary 0 days that no one knows about. They're for vulnerabilities that have been out for years and years. So absolutely patch that, patch those systems. Now, if you're in more of a broadcast environment, you might have a lot of embedded systems. Now these things can't be patched because they're embedded. In practice, under the hood, they're running something like Linux or Windows, but you still can't patch them. And so in this case, you need to isolate them because if they're in an open network with a lot of lateral movement, so once you're in, you can move anywhere. They can really do a lot of damage. So if you can't patch it, isolate it. On the authentication front, single sign-on, wherever you can, do single sign-on and multi-factor authentication. If you can't do single sign-on, use a password manager because any of the decent password managers out there can do single sign-on MFA. So you can add that in, and you can also then get logs of who's accessed what passwords. Have a good think about what you do and don't want to manage. So from a software dev front, serverless does offer a lot of advantages because you can focus just on the application that you're writing, and all the issues of hardening and patching the underlying OS and infrastructure you don't have to worry about. When you're looking at SaaS and similar type services, you really need to think about third-party management or how you're dealing with those third parties, because just because you've outsourced it doesn't mean you lose responsibility. If you're doing procurement, have a set of standard questions that you can either just do a check against their website, or if they're in a formal RFP, respond to. Wherever you can, ask for evidence. So if the vendor, for example, is saying yes, we do penetration testing annually, ask to see a copy of the reports. They can easily be redacted, and if they won't do that, then you probably need to have a think about a different provider. Now, as far as security tools and approaches go, mentioned before about the broadcast networks that are sort of wide open, and then the traditional IT networks are actually the same. There shouldn't really be differentiating there. What the zero trust method is, and there's a lot of buzzword about this stuff. I think it's a bit overhyped, but it is a really important concept. So instead of once you're authenticated, you're in the network and you can move around as needed. Once you're authenticated, you can do that one thing that you're authenticated for and nothing else. And there's a number of different ways of skinning that cat, but it is, I think, the mindset that we all really need to be in. We talked a bit about WAF, so I won't go into any more of that, but I will talk about CI/CD because your CI/CD pipeline is a great way to uplift your security posture. The OWASP is a set of security standards for things you should be looking for. So it's things like your SQL injection, for example. Now you can do static code analysis, tools like SonarQube that'll give you reports on your code, and you can incorporate that into your CI/CD pipeline. So if it fails, you can't ship that code. And likewise for containers as well. So before you push that Docker container into production, give it a vulnerability scan, something that you can do like the open source Nessus or the sort of Tenable commercial version. And there are other products out there as well. But again, it fix the problem before it goes into production. And so vulnerability scanning is absolutely a key thing you can integrate into your pipeline to help you be secure. There are all the key things I guess I wanted to go through. There's a universe of stuff in cyber, but they're the sort of key things I guess I picked. So for more information, if you're just starting out, go have a look at the ASD Essential 8. So ASD is the Australian Signals Directorate, sort of like government security agency. But what they did do is have a look at what are the vulnerabilities that are responsible for 90% of of attacks out there, and it is things like patching and single sign-on. So if you're not doing anything right now, go have a look at that. It's the easiest way to get started and the best bang for your buck. If you're in the content game, then even if you're not doing premium content now, go have a look at the MPA security guidelines. There's nothing in there that won't also show up in other security standards, but they are very targeted towards media. And if you are doing premium content, they are things you really need to be taking seriously. And the last one is, if you're in a larger organization and you have a security team, go use them, become their friend. You will find that they're not there to try and put a kibosh on everything. And what they are wanting to do is to enable you to do things securely. And so reach out to your security team. You'll probably find that with even a little bit of relationship there, they'll help you out a lot. So that's all I wanted to go through. Hopefully I've woken up and got myself online and can be part of some Q&A. So thank you. My name's Scott Favelle. If you want to reach out, just hit me up on LinkedIn. I'm happy to connect. Thanks, and hopefully I'll talk to you all now. Cheers.